LinkedIn believes B2B marketing can be to brilliant, be to bold, and be to breakthrough. How? With a platform purpose-built to make B2B mean more for your business. A platform with tools to help you build better relationships with your key customers, to boost your buyer journey while building your brand. A platform with the trusted data and lead generation you need to beat KPIs, drive ROI, and stand out amongst the competition. And with the targeting tools on LinkedIn, you can reach your precise audience right down to their job title, company name, location, and more, to make sure your ads are always being seen by those who matter. So get ready to be to boldly go where no marketers have gone before, because LinkedIn is where B2B is everything it can be. Rethink your B2B marketing LinkedIn ads and get a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
When you want to save money, check out The General. They're a quality car insurance company with great low rates, and they've been saving people money for nearly 60 years. Plus, they're super flexible. You can choose when and how you want to pay, whether it's cash, card, or check. So to get quality coverage at prices you can afford, call 1-800-GENERAL or visit thegeneral.com. The General Auto Insurance Services Incorporated, an insurance agency, Nashville, Tennessee. Some restrictions apply.
I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Lesley Bielby.
I mean, at the end of the day, advertising is all about changing behavior, changing beliefs and changing behavior. I think the difference with positive behavior change is that we're not just changing one behavior, we're actually creating better habits that last a lifetime.
Lesley Bielby is the Co-CEO of DiMassimo Goldstein, the industry-leading agency in positive behavior change marketing, and has authored the only modern guide in account planning, Super Strategist, the art and science of modern account planning. A 30-year veteran in the world of advertising, she was one of the British account planners to cross the pond in the turn of the century to bring the discipline to America. In addition to DiGo, Lesley has led and been a part of a number of agencies, including Hill Holliday, McKinney and Silver, Digitas, and MMB. Lesley, welcome to On Brand.
Hi, very happy to be talking with you today, Nick.
Yeah, and I'm excited to chat and learn more specifically about a label that I feel like I should know what it means, but I don't exactly. So talk me through positive behavior change marketing.
Yeah, sure. So for several years, Mark DiMassimo, who's the founder of DiMassimo Goldstein, has really been focused on working with brands that believe in and market for positive behavior change. And so about 2 or so years ago, myself, Lee Goldstein, and Mark and the rest of the agency got together and decided, you know what? We don't want to work with brands anymore that don't do good in the world. And so we are going to become an agency that only focuses on brands that believe in and practice positive behavior change. So essentially that means helping customers and consumers do the things that they know they should be doing that are good for them, but for some reason are hard to do. And so that has been our focus, not only for the last couple of years, actually. The agency has excelled with positive behavior change brands before that became our credo and our positioning. But that is what we do now. That's all we do now.
Can you talk through one of those examples of behavior change marketing at play with a brand?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So one of the brands that we've been working with the last few years is BetterHelp. So BetterHelp, many of you probably know this brand. It is the biggest online therapy group in the world, owned by Teladoc. And essentially they came to us and a very typical issue that fledgling brands have. They're only 9 years old, but they're doing unbelievably well. But they noticed their cost per acquisition was starting to go up. And that's because they've been very hyper-focused on performance marketing. And so we decided together, look, we need to do some brand work. And so to be able to do that brand work, we decided, well, what is the change that we want to make in the world together? We actually found the solution when we interviewed some of their therapists, and we asked the question, who are the hardest people to convert? to believing in therapy and believing in the positive change that it can make in your experience. And they all said pretty much the same thing. They said it's Black men, Asian men, and Hispanic men, pretty much in that order. And so we did some online focus groups. This is during COVID. So online focus groups and some quantitative research with those groups. And the results were pretty alarming, along with some traditional groups with traditional audiences and female groups. But it was those groups that gave us some really deep insight that held us to believe that certain people from certain ethnic groups believe that therapy is for those that are weak. And we heard quotes like, if my girlfriend knew what I was doing, she'd be embarrassed for me. If my parents knew that I needed therapy, they'd wonder why I didn't just go talk to my pastor. If my community knew that I needed therapy or was seeking therapy, they think that I wasn't able to solve my own problems with the family. And so essentially the change that we had to make there was to convince all people that therapy is important because mental health issues don't discriminate, and nor does BetterHelp. And so really that's a very typical example of, having a deep sort of dive into why there is a certain belief in a certain behavior, avoiding therapy in this case, what is behind that, what drives that, then creating a campaign, which we did together that was incredibly successful, that helps to kind of convince those audiences, you know what, this is something that could be really beneficial to you. So that's a typical example of a typical business that we might work on to create change.
And what's atypical, perhaps for many marketers out there listening to this, is many are in some form in the business of behavior change, but in understanding that and triggering that. There's a lot of hard work that has to be done. You mentioned focus groups. What other foundational elements help bring marketing like this to life?
Yeah. Do you mind if I address the question of behavior change versus positive behavior change?
No, not at all. Go.
I mean, at the end of the day, advertising is all about changing behavior, changing beliefs and changing behavior. I think the difference with positive behavior change is that we're not just changing one behavior, we're actually creating better habits that last a lifetime. That's really important. We're not just trying to sell, baked beans one day. We're trying to sell a product or a service that's going to be beneficial, or a medication or a therapy or whatever that product might be, that's going to not only benefit that consumer or customer for life, it's also going to make for better business results. So that is one fundamental difference. And I've worked in plenty of brands and plenty of agencies that believe in behavior change, but not necessarily positive behavior change. The question that you asked about tools at our disposition that help us, I mean, we really believe that belief and behavior are intrinsically interlinked. So getting behind what is driving that belief, which is ultimately driving that behavior, is critical. So we use any form of research that you can imagine. We have an in-house research group called Propolis that do qualitative ethnographies, in-homes, shop-alongs. We do a lot of social listening. We look to see what's trending on any given day, any topics that are trending. So pretty much every tool that is imaginable, we will use to try and understand what is going on in our culture, what is going on with this audience, on the broader landscape, and what is going on with them specifically when it comes to the product or service that we're working with. So research is an incredibly important tool at DiMassimo Goldstein. Our industry in general is an important tool, but it's of particular importance when you're doing this type of work. We also work with a panel of experts because I trained as a psychotherapist, but it was a long time ago. Mark has been a scholar and of positive behavior change and an advocate for at least 20 years. But it can't just be us. We have to tap into psychologists and professors and neuroscientists that really understand this at a profound level, and we pull them into the conversation when we need to get a broader perspective.
That's, again, such an important clarification in the work. And also, I'm glad you back things up to discuss positive behavior change versus just behavior change. Because I think that's, like I said, that could be, any really form of marketing.
Sure.
And in talking about this in terms of, I feel like sometimes our industry, rightfully for a majority of this, doesn't always have the best reputation in preying on some behavior change that can be unproductive,
Yeah.
unhealthy. And I think that especially in terms of appealing to new businesses and also emerging kinds of businesses like BetterHelp that have, I don't know if the right label is mission, but a very positive focus. It seems like the brand of your agency really needs to address that as well. Does that move into how you communicate who you are, who DiGo is?
Yeah, I mean, in every conversation that we have, every podcast like this, every article, every Mark in particular is extremely present in social media. Every thought leadership piece, every time we judge awards, that is our platform. I've worked with a lot of agencies. DiGo is not my first agency. I've worked for several agencies over a fairly long career. And I've also worked on the establishment of positionings or purposes, however you want to define it. And typically, agencies we're very good at doing this kind of work for our clients, but just as is often the case, we're not very good at doing this kind of work for ourselves. And so, I myself have been involved in the kind of the creation of, or the co-creation of platforms that we all believed in on that day. And then ultimately we just couldn't agree on being hyper-focused. And so none of us really kind of lived that every single day. There are maybe a few exceptions to that, but in my experience, it's more the norm than the exception. In this case, this is something that it's not just a positioning or a purpose, it's something that we really believe in. It's something that we will talk about whenever we get the opportunity. Whenever we speak to a prospect, we always talk about what kind of agency we are, and we always have the conversation, are we going to be a good fit for each other, which is somewhat unusual these days, as our industry starts to shrink a little bit, to actually, in some cases, have to say to a client, you know what, this isn't a good fit for us. We think you're great, but it's just not something that is going to be of interest to us because we just can't see how we can kind of create positive change with your customers and how the brand can actually play that role. So we do say no to quite a few things, which is, sometimes scary, but necessary, because if you're not living what you say you're living, then what's the point of having that belief system in the first place?
On Brand will be right back after this. LinkedIn believes B2B marketing can be to brilliant, be to bold, and be to breakthrough. How? With a platform purpose-built to make B2B mean more for your business. A platform with tools to help you build better relationships with your key customers, to boost your buyer journey while building your brand. A platform with the trusted data and lead generation you need to beat KPIs, drive ROI, and stand out amongst the competition. And with the targeting tools on LinkedIn, you can reach your precise audience right down to their job title, company name, location, and more, to make sure your ads are always being seen by those who matter. So get ready to boldly go where no marketers have gone before, because LinkedIn is where B2B is everything it can be. Rethink your B2B marketing LinkedIn ads and get a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
You may know you are listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Izzy House hosts a great podcast called the Space Marketing Podcast. Izzy, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Space Marketing Podcast is where we explore marketing principles, strategies, and tactics through the lens of space. I talk space with some very interesting industry professionals about their challenges and successes with marketing in the new commercial space economy. This show is for business leadership, entrepreneurs, and the space curious.
Wow. And where in the universe can people subscribe?
All of the major channels, and you can also find it on MPN and spacemarketingpodcast.com.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
Now, back to the show. So you've been talking a lot about fit, which I think provides a good segue as we look at account planning.
Mhm.
And there are countless books on all countless aspects of advertising and agencies, but a book on account planning
Mhm.
is somewhat rare. So
Mhm.
talk me through how and again because of all of the I teach at the university level, and all the young people are excited about agency jobs, but
Mhm.
it's probably because they think of the creative aspects of agency work,
Mhm.
and account planning may not be what they're thinking of, but taking on a book is an enormous outlay of time.
Mhm.
Talk me through a bit about how you said yes, account planning for
Mhm.
the focus of your book.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm a CEO now, but I've been an account planner pretty much most of my career, with the exception of the first couple, 2 or 3 years. So that's a long career. That's 3 decades. 10% in the UK, 10% in Boston, 10% in New York. Um, the reason why I thought that this is something that I should really take on is because I had endless amounts of young people, probably a lot of people like your students, that I would give informational interviews to, which I'm very happy to do, including my own daughter, who would ask me, "Well, this is a good conversation, but are there any books that you can recommend?" And I was always a little bit embarrassed to recommend, really the one book that is really the Bible of account planning. That was the Bible when I first came to the States, which is John Steele's book, The Art of Account Planning, Truth, Lies, and Advertising. Because that book it's a great book, but it's well over 23, 24 years old now. So that book predates really the internet, social media, digital, everything. And so there have been other books written, but they tend to be more academic because all of us are so busy. None of us really have time to put pen to paper. So I thought, you know what? I was trained in the UK, which is the birthplace of account planning. I'm still working in agencies. I'm still training planners. If anyone's going to write this, then why not me? And so, I contacted a few publishers. There were two that were really interested. Ultimately, I chose one in particular who were fantastic. Um, and then I just sat down to write it. So every night, every weekend that I wasn't working, I just put in the discipline. And I wanted to write an accurate guide to what it's like to be an account planner. At that point, it would have been in 2020, 2021. Of course, COVID hit right in the middle of this. But I wanted to put the record straight. And so I deliberately called the book Super Strategist, but also The Art and Science of Modern Account Planning specifically. Because, again, I wanted to create not a manual, but again, a guide and a reference point for any young planner coming up into the industry that they could read and get a good sense of what this discipline is and why it's so critical to our industry and what some of the tools are available for us to use as planners, including research, and which ones work best. So essentially, that's it. It's full of anecdotes from my own career, examples. I actually at the end give one example of an entire planning process from start to finish, just to show how the whole thing comes together. And it accumulates in a customer journey map, which at DiGo we call better habits mapping. So that's essentially why I wrote it. I wanted to give something back to the industry. I genuinely did, and it seems to have been received with open arms, and people seem to be very happy with it, which makes me very happy.
I love it. And again, that book, for those listening, is called Super Strategist. So definitely worth checking out if account planning is either what you do or what you should be focusing on more. So, in talking about account planning, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, especially, it still sounds surprising hearing the words spoken of our agency, or our industry shrinking with all of the different challenges that we're facing. So in looking at that, what is in working with clients, what is critical in maintaining that relationship at this most challenging of times?
Yeah. And so one thing, as soon as I said the industry is shrinking, it is somewhat, but I do want to make one clarification point. I really believe that it's somewhat shape-shifting. I believe that there are many different ways to get into the industry that go beyond traditional or digital or social agencies. You can go client side, you can go media side. A lot of brands have brought agencies in-house or have bought agencies and have allowed them to not only work on their brand, but work on external brands too, so they can pull in the best talent. You've got brands like Accenture that bought up Droga 5. You have a lot of mergers that have happened, like Wyndham and Thompson. And so really the industry has undergone some fairly dramatic change over the course of the last 5 years. But it's still a viable industry and still something that I believe is really critical to the health and well-being of any given brand. And so I just want to make that clarification point. I do believe one of the benefits of having been around for a while and having seen the cycles of our industry over time, but also, at every point, maybe every decade of my 30-decade career, I've maybe thought to myself, maybe every 7 years I get the itch. And maybe I should be doing something else. I don't know. Is there something else out there? Something else happens, So it was the internet, and then it was social, and then it was digital, and now it's kind of Web3 and, the metaverse. And there's always something that is riveting to wrap your head around that just keeps me really engaged and wanting to keep doing this. I think that that's the first thing. It's staying ahead, not keeping up with, but staying ahead of the changes that are going on in our industry, staying ahead of the changes that are going on in my discipline, my historic discipline, which is account planning / strategy. By the way, those two names are interchangeable today. I use the word planning in my book so that when people were searching for it, they could find it easily. And I also use the word strategist in the title. But that discipline has never been more critical. But the days of, when I was in my early 20s of, doing a bit of qualitative research and coming back with a bit of an insight, putting it in a creative brief and handing it over to creatives and then crossing my fingers and hoping 6 weeks later, something decent was going to come out of their locked door. Obviously, it's fundamentally changed since then. Nowadays, the role of agencies with planners at the core of that is to really put the customer or the consumer right at the center of everything we do. And the way that we're structured, is around that. It's, what is the business issue? Why is the business suffering from the issues that it's suffering from? What is the lacking in the behavior of customers or consumers that's affecting this? What's the kind of behavior change that we want to provoke? Why do we want to provoke that? And then how is that positive behavior change in our case? And then what tools can we use to try and understand the belief system that has led to this? And then when we have that insight, what are some of the positioning territories that we could explore in research or with clients or in workshops or otherwise? And then from that, how does the customer make decisions? I mentioned before, habit mapping is very much at the core of what we do at DiGo. Lots of media companies do customer journey mapping. Lots of other specialists do the same thing, but the way that we do them, they are fully integrated. We use research to understand the trigger that makes a consumer want to jump into a category, the decisions that they make when they're exploring that category or that product or service. Where do they go? Do they go online? Is it word of mouth? Do they ask their friends? Do they go specifically to a website? Are they just doing a general search? And then ultimately, what the kind of the reasons to believe that make them choose one brand over another, and then ultimately how they experience that brand and share it with others. And so we do all of that mapping, again, using client research and proprietary research. We have a thing at the bottom of our habit maps that we call the emotional index, where we plot by asking the consumer a series of questions in our research. How do you feel as you go through each part of this decision-making process? And what that does is it uncovers all of the holes in the journey. So the places where somebody may not be predisposed towards a brand or a service or an industry. And because we've done the deep research, we understand why that is, what belief and behavior has resulted in them not being predisposed towards you. And then, when they do their search, it helps us understand the different channels that we need to be in terms of media to be able to engage that person. So it identifies the holes from a brand level, identifies the channels that we need to use to fill those holes. It could be anything from redesigning an app through to, an in-store experience, user experience work. It could be brand work because there's no predisposition. It could be social because there's no sharing happening, or the client is underutilizing their own channels. And then from that helps us understand the creative executions that are needed to fill the media channels that we've identified that fill those holes. So as you can see, it's a lot that we do now in our industry, and it's very much based on helping our client to change that behavior for the better, to optimize their business. But I do want to say this, that doesn't mean to say that creative is undermined in any way, shape, or form. Creative is still king. It's still the number one thing that we do, and the number one role of an account planner or strategic planner is to make sure that we give that creative as much insight that they need for them to do the best work of their careers to help make that change. So it's very much a balance of art and science.
Yeah, I love that label of our business being an art and a science, because I truly believe that. But I think, coming full circle with what you just said too about the role of creative, because it seems like, we talk, or many talk a lot about the importance of research and what's being done, but few seem to have it truly as fully integrated as you've just described. And I think that's not only how you do a better job at that, but also, to that last point you just made, it is how we ensure that that creative gets what they need to produce the work that stands out today.
Precisely, yeah. And there's also an important distinction in the way that I train my strategists when it comes to research is, remember, your job is to use the research to be informed by what the customer or consumer is saying, not be led by what they're saying. And so, it's getting that insight. Well, now I understand the issue. Now I understand the behavior to be changed. Working very closely with creatives and comms planning as well, which we have in-house at DiGo too, to try and identify along the journey the places where we can pull that person along. But really importantly, not being afraid to take a risk and do work that is incredibly brave. So a lot of the work that we do in research is way up front. So we're giving the creatives the right insight, the right information, so that they can create their own sandbox to play in, where there's no holes barred, where the work should make us exhilarated and a bit terrified at the same time, actually, for it to stand out. Mm-hmm.
That's an important step and an important clarification too, as well. Lesley, as we start to wrap up, I love asking folks for a brand that's made them smile, and I don't want to tee up expectations, but with as much as we've talked about in-depth behavioral research, I am fascinated by what you will select as a brand that has produced that response of a smile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's several, but I think I'm going to pick on Pot Noodle. So Pot Noodle's kind of dear to my heart. Do you know Pot Noodle? It's more of a UK brand than
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. So Pot Noodle, if I'm completely honest, is pretty nasty stuff. It's basically noodles in a plastic tub with fake flavor in a packet. Yeah. You have an equivalent in the States, but essentially that's what it is. There's no putting lipstick on the pig. It is what it is. But it's dear to my heart because just before I left the UK, the last agency I worked for, which no longer exists, unfortunately, was an agency called Hal Henry. And Hal Henry was probably most famous for Orange Man, the tango campaign with a little orange guy. And at the time that I worked there, I had nothing to do with this Pot Noodle campaign, by the way. I wish I had. But they were producing probably some of the most irreverent and terrifying advertising in I would say the world, actually. And they discovered that pot noodle is, first of all, it's from Wales, which is a little country and this kind of the west of the UK.
Yeah.
They discovered that it is pretty nasty. And they discovered that, there was really no getting over that and just to run with it. And they created a very irreverent campaign about these Welsh guys that were, I can't even describe it, was just so crazy. So there's a lot of kind of affection that I have for that brand because I remember that the agency, one of the reasons why Hell Henry was so successful was on the heels of that campaign and the Tango campaign. Unilever recently, however, did a campaign called, essentially, it's called no longer, so pot noodle, no longer crap is the line. Now, I don't know anybody that worked on this, so I don't know what went into the campaign, but it's pretty obvious that they've done some research and people had said, this is just terrible stuff. And as taste, I'm assuming that as taste is starting to evolve and as Generation Z in particular is getting a more discerning palate, that maybe the sales were declining. And so, rather than doing what Domino's did and saying, hey, we're terrible, we're going to go out there and we're going to start from scratch and we're going to create a better pizza. And we heard you, America, which I thought was a brilliant strategy, by the way. Yeah. This is different. They basically are not apologizing. They're just saying, hey, we used to be crap, but we're not crap anymore. But they're also not saying that they're great.
Yeah.
They're almost saying that we're a bit better than we were. We're not crap anymore. We're just okay. And introduce some new flavors. So I love first of all, I think it's a really good example of how you can be irreverent, you can stand out. That thing has been shared so many times. It kind of blew up social media. It's a 40-year-old brand that was lost. And, it's suddenly been resurrected. Coming up with flavors like Christmas dinner flavor is just genius. And just the idea of like a person sitting alone having a pot noodle at Christmas. I think Brits in particular would find that quite amusing. But it's how to create something that generates a ton of sharing, a ton of kind of buzz, a ton of eccentric kind of, discussion, and doing it in a way that's true to the brand, not turning its back on who the brand is, which has always been very irreverent. So I love that. I love the fact that they did the work and they were brave. And Unilever, you wouldn't expect Unilever to be quite that brave, but they do have a history of pulling some incredible punches when they want to. And I think this is a really good example of that.
Yeah. Well, and you certainly delivered there on the smile, because I think that reinforces exactly what you were talking about, though, of being bold, creative, but you can take a pretty good guess at what research was telling them to lead that strategy too. So definitely go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. Lesley, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm CEO of DiMassimo Goldstein. Come to our website, DiMassimo Goldstein. We're a New York-based agency that is all about positive behavior change. Our nickname's DiGo for short, but you can read all about us, all about me there. And then obviously, buy my book, Super Strategist, The Art and Science of Modern Account Planning.
Awesome. And we will link up to all of that in our show notes, which folks can find at onbrandpodcast.com. Lesley, thanks for being on brand with us.
Thank you, Nick. I really enjoyed it.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.